As we move into the late medieval period, armored knights become more elite and specialized troops on the battlefield. Their opponents also wore increasingly protective armor, making it necessary to have helmets that could keep up. In this video, we'll explore how helmets developed from the 10th through the 16th centuries. Number 1. The Nasal Helm. The nasal helm was a type of helmet that was used in Western and Central Europe during the 10th through the 12th centuries. It was an evolution of the conical helms that were popular during the Viking Age. However, unlike those earlier helmets, the nasal had a nose guard, or nasal, attached to it. This additional piece of metal protected the wearer's face while still allowing for a wide field of vision. These helmets were typically made of iron or steel and often had a simple design with a single band or groove running around the helmet. The nose guard could be raised or lowered depending on the threat level and was sometimes reinforced with additional metal plates. The nasal helmet first appeared in the 9th century and became increasingly popular during the 10th and 11th centuries. It was commonly worn by infantry, cavalry, and even some mounted knights. It offered greater protection than earlier helmet designs while still allowing for good visibility and maneuverability. One of the most famous depictions of the nasal helmet can be found in the Bayeux Tapestry, which depicts the Battle of Hastings in 1066. The tapestry shows a knight wearing a nasal helmet with his shield emblazoned with the arms of the House of Normandy, indicating that these helmets were likely associated with the rise of Norman knights during this period. This type of helmet was particularly suited to the tactics and equipment of early heavy cavalry who relied on shock tactics and close-quarter combat. As such, the nasal helmet is often seen as a symbol of this type of warfare. By the end of the 12th century, the nasal helmet was largely superseded by the Great Helm and other enclosed designs, but it remains an iconic image of medieval warfare. No. 2. The Great Helm. The Great Helm was a type of helmet that was used during the High Middle Ages, first seen in the 1180s during the Crusades. It was a distinctive cylindrical helmet that enclosed the entire head and was designed to offer maximum protection in battle. The Great Helm was a relatively late development in medieval armor, appearing in the late 12th century during the Third Crusade. It was initially used by the Crusader knights who fought against Saladin in the Holy Land. The helmet was likely inspired by contemporary Asian designs, such as the Chinese hatchet helmets, which had been known in Europe since the 10th century. The Great Helm was made of steel and had a simple design with narrow eye slits and small holes for breathing. Its large size and weight made it impractical for prolonged use, so it was typically worn only for short periods during intense fighting. The helmet was also difficult to remove once it was on, so it was usually discarded after the battle. Despite its drawbacks, the Great Helm became an iconic symbol of crusading knightly warfare and was widely used throughout the Crusader states in the Holy Land. It also found favor in Europe, where it was used by English and French knights during the 12th and 13th centuries. The helmet reached its peak popularity in the 1220s during the reign of King Richard the Lionheart of England. The Great Helm is prominently featured in the Machowski Bible, a 13th century manuscript that depicts scenes from the Old and New Testament. The helmet is shown being worn by knights in scenes depicting battle and warfare, highlighting its association with martial prowess and Christian valor. Overall, the Great Helm is considered to be one of the most iconic symbols of medieval armor and warfare, representing the height of crusading knightly warfare during the High Middle Ages. Number 3. The Bassinet. The bassinet was a type of medieval helmet that was used from the 13th through the 14th centuries. It was lighter and more mobile than the Great Helm, but still offered significant protection. The bassinet had a distinctive rounded or pointed skull, unlike the Great Helm's cylindrical shape. It was typically made of steel and had a mailavain tail, or chainmail beard, attached to the bottom of the helmet to protect the wearer's neck and shoulders. Later bassinets also featured visors that covered the face, giving them a pig face appearance. This type of helmet was commonly used by mounted knights and heavily armored infantry during the late Middle Ages. It was particularly well suited for the tactics and equipment of the English and French armies during the 100 Years' War, allowing for greater mobility and balance while still providing good protection. Famous battles featuring the Bassinet include Crécy in 1346 and Agincourt in 1415, where English longbowmen wearing bassinet and mail hauberks proved highly effective against French knights. The bassinet remains a recognizable symbol of medieval warfare, often depicted in art and literature as the standard helmet of the medieval knight. Number 4. The Kettle Hat. The Kettle Hat was a type of helmet that was used during the High Middle Ages from the 12th through the 15th centuries. Unlike the previous helmets we've discussed, the Kettle Hat had an open design with a wide brim that extended around the sides and back of the head. This gave the helmet a distinctive metal hat look and provided some protection to the wearer's face and neck without obscuring their vision. The Kettle Hat was typically made of iron or steel and was often worn by infantry, archers, and peasants, as well as some knights. It was practical and inexpensive to produce, making it a popular choice for soldiers and commoners alike. One of the earliest depictions of the Kettle Hat can be found in the Machovsky Bible, a 13th century manuscript that features illustrations of biblical scenes. The helmet is shown being worn by soldiers in scenes depicting battle and warfare, suggesting that it was a common helmet of the period. Other examples of the Kettle Hat can be found in English manuscripts such as the Luttrell Psalter, which dates back to the 14th century. The helmet is shown being worn by soldiers and civilians, demonstrating its widespread use during the late medieval period. The Kettle Hat remained in use until the 15th century, when it was eventually replaced by more enclosed helmets such as the Sallet and the Armet. Despite its relatively short lifespan, the helmet has become an iconic symbol of medieval warfare and is often depicted in art and literature as the helmet of the common soldier. No. 5. The Sallet. The Sallet was a type of helmet that was used during the late medieval period, originating in Italy and Germany in the 15th century before spreading across Western Europe. Unlike the earlier helmets we've discussed, the Sallet had a distinctive rounded skull that tapered to a point at the back. It also featured a tail that protected the back of the neck and could be tucked under the collar of a padded or leather jacket. The Sallet was typically made of steel and had a hinged visor that could be raised or lowered to protect the wearer's face. The visor could also be locked in place at various angles, allowing the wearer to see without having to lift the entire helmet. The Sallet was commonly used by mounted knights and infantry during the late medieval period and was often paired with a breastplate and other pieces of armor. It was well suited to the tactics and equipment of the late medieval battlefield, offering good protection while still allowing for good visibility and maneuverability. Famous battles featuring the Sallet include several engagements during the 100 Years' War and the Tournament of 1475, which was held in France to celebrate the marriage of King Edward IV of England and Elizabeth Woodville. The Sallet remained in use until the 16th century, when it was eventually superseded by the Armet and other closed helmets. Despite its relatively short lifespan, the Sallet remains an iconic symbol of late medieval warfare and is often depicted in art and literature as the dominant helmet of the late medieval knight. No. 6. The Armet. The Armet was a type of helmet that was used during the Renaissance, first appearing in Italy in the 15th century before spreading to the rest of Europe. It was a complex and sophisticated design that was intended to be used with full-plate armor and featured a number of distinctive characteristics that set it apart from earlier helmets. The hallmark of the Armet was its hinged cheek pieces, which locked under the wearer's chin, completely enclosing the helmet and providing maximum protection. Unlike the Sallet and other open-faced helmets, the Armet left little to no room for the wearer's face, although some versions did feature a visor that could be raised or lowered. Armets were typically made of steel and were often decorated with elaborate designs and etchings. They were usually worn by mounted knights and heavily armored infantry, and were designed to be used in conjunction with other pieces of armor, such as a breastplate and gauntlets. The armet reached its peak popularity in the 16th century and was featured prominently in the works of Renaissance artists such as Andrea Solari and Antonio Rizzo. It was also prominently displayed in Maximilian I's festival books, which were illustrated manuscripts that documented the lavish pageants and tournaments that were held during his reign. The armet remained in use until the 17th century, when it was eventually replaced by the closed helm, which provided even greater protection. However, the armet remains an iconic symbol of Renaissance knightly culture and is often depicted in art and literature as the ultimate expression of the medieval knight's armor.